Hey guys, tonight we're going to step inside the rough-hewn world of medieval peasants, where the cold isn't just inconvenient. It's a slow, stubborn, bone-deep kind of misery. Picture this. Your eyelids crack open before dawn in a single-room cottage built mostly of timber, mud, and drafts. Your breath rises in little white puffs, and when you swing your feet over the edge of the straw mattress, they land squarely in a frozen puddle. No, it's not water from a leak. It's your own sweat from last night's bed-warmed panic attack, now a patch of ice. Your shoes, frozen to the dirt floor. Your toes, numb and slightly skeptical that they still exist. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the wool blanket, if you're lucky enough to have one, closer, but it's as stiff as yesterday's porridge. A coarse linen shirt sticks to your skin like cold cling wrap, and your breath fogs the air as you glance toward the small hearth, long gone cold. The fire's ashes smolder faintly, but no flames dance. Those logs burned out hours ago. In fact, medieval peasants didn't even have chimneys, not for a long while. Smoke just drifted lazily out a hole in the roof, or didn't. Historians still argue whether these holes were intentional ventilation or just structural optimism. Either way, your lungs become familiar with smoky mornings and soot-stained beams. Thatched roofs, made of straw or reeds, did little to keep out winter air. On bad days, frost crept inside. On worse days, mice crept in with it. There's a rustle now, a reminder that you're never quite alone. Don't worry, though. It's probably just a rat visiting for breakfast. The floor beneath your feet isn't wood. That would be a luxury. It's packed dirt, hard and uneven, and frozen solid. Some homes used reeds or straw for insulation, but unless you swept daily, which you didn't, it quickly became indistinguishable from the livestock bedding. You shuffle to the hearth with fingers tucked into your armpits. The embers still breathe faintly, like the last whisper of yesterday. It's your job to revive them. Carefully. The fire was your survival line, and letting it go out overnight could mean a day of frostbitten miseries or cold gruel. You poke the ashes with a burnt stick, squinting in the half-light. Maybe, just maybe, it'll catch. You grab a few twigs and scraps, whispering to the fire like it's a friend. Sometimes you even talk to it out loud, because honestly, who else is awake to judge? The children? Still snoring under a shared blanket, curled up like puppies. The adults in the village would sometimes sleep in shifts, especially in the dead of winter, when keeping the fire alive wasn't optional. A warm room was a dream. A warm corner was an achievement. And yet, in all this, there's a kind of rhythm. You know exactly how cold the morning is by how loudly the rafters creak, or whether the hens have even bothered to stir. Even your dog, assuming you're lucky enough to own one, burrows deeper into the hay near the door, refusing to be useful before sunrise. There's a strange peace in this world. It's brutal, yes, but also simple. You don't lie awake wondering if you left your emails unread. You lie awake because your feet are popsicles and the pigs won't stop snoring. Oh, and one more thing. Don't forget to cover your water pot, because if you don't, it'll freeze over by morning and you'll be chipping ice just to drink. Historians still argue whether peasants fully acclimated to this level of cold or just suffered in silence. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Resignation, adaptation, and that timeless survival strategy, complaining to whoever's nearby. But now, The fire has caught again. A tiny flame. Warmth creeping back like an old friend too shy to knock. You sit beside it, hands outstretched, and wonder what kind of day awaits. Probably cold. Definitely hard. But for this one moment, with orange light flickering across the walls and the frost melting near your feet, it almost feels like comfort. You wrap yourself in the one thing that passes for a coat, a wool tunic, frayed at the sleeves and patched so many times it looks like a quilt made by someone with very poor eyesight. Beneath that is a rough linen shift that hasn't been washed since midsummer, and you're not judging. There's no soap, the river's half frozen, and honestly, you've got bigger problems, like your knees cracking from the cold every time you move. Your winter wardrobe isn't about fashion, it's about survival. You aren't layering because you want to look cozy on Instagram. You're layering because if your chest gets wet and then cold, you're 2 coughs away from medieval pneumonia, and they don't sell cough drops in this village. So, what do you have? Wool, if you're lucky. More often it's hemp or linen, materials that make excellent summer wear, but are about as insulating in winter as a paper napkin. You wrap your feet in whatever's handy, old cloth, straw, or if you're feeling daring, you shove them into hardened leather shoes that squeak like ducks and leak like sieves. But here's the thing. Everyone stinks. Even the lord of the manor. Bathing is rare and, in winter, borderline dangerous. Exposing wet skin to frigid air? Bold move. Historians still argue whether peasants truly avoided baths or just took them stealthily, like some forbidden pleasure. In either case, you smell like sheep. The sheep smell like you, and no one cares. Now comes the outer layer. Maybe a cloak. If you own one, it's made of wool or sheepskin, stiff as a board and heavier than gilt. If not, you make do. Some peasants wore layers of sackcloth or even moss-stuffed tunics. Yes, moss. Absorbs water, insulates decently, and gives you the charming aroma of a damp forest. It's like medieval Febreze, but alive. To keep your head warm, you tie on a coif, a kind of linen bonnet. If you're older, maybe you've upgraded to a fur-lined cap, usually rabbit. The fur isn't there for show. It's there because your ears freeze first. That, or your nose, or your fingers, or all of the above. Your hands are the most problematic. Gloves were rare and expensive. You might wrap your hands in strips of wool or leather, or just keep them jammed under your arms like you're hiding something. And you are your last ounce of body heat. Children, if you have them, are burrito wrapped in layers and given the job of moving around constantly. Run to the well and back, twice, you tell your son. Not because the well is dry, but because you want him to come back pink-faced and alive. There's also the mystery pelt, some hide that no one quite remembers acquiring. It hangs by the door, shedding in the breeze. Could be goat, could be some unlucky forest creature. Doesn't matter. When it gets really cold, you wear it like a cape and pretend it's heroic, until it starts to smell again, which is often. By now, you've dressed for the day, and you still feel like a human icicle. But it's a start. You tug your tunic lower, kick your half-frozen shoes loose from the floor, and breathe on your fingers as you step outside, and immediately regret it. The air hits you like a slap. Your nose hairs freeze on contact. The sky is a pale, icy blue, and the ground crunches beneath your feet, like walking on broken pottery. The snow hasn't fallen yet, but it will. The clouds above are heavy with that gray-white promise of misery. Still, you're not alone. Down the lane, other peasants emerge from their homes, bundled in similar fashion. One woman has wrapped her baby in an old wool apron. Another man, clearly proud of his fashion sense, is wearing 2 different shoes and what looks like a sack over his shoulders. It works. Sort of. You exchange brief nods. No one wants to talk long in this weather. Your teeth chatter with more enthusiasm than your mouth. And so you trudge on, layered in scratchy fabrics and hopeful moss, into a day that promises very little warmth, but at least some movement. Movement, after all, is the one reliable heater you've got. The sun hasn't properly risen yet, just sort of hinted at the idea, and you're already back inside, shivering slightly less aggressively than before. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a thick wedge of yesterday's rye bread, tough enough to chip a tooth. You dunk it in a lukewarm wooden bowl of something between broth and wishful thinking. If you're lucky, there's a sliver of carrot floating in it. A real feast. But now comes the real challenge: surviving the night again. You eye the bed in the corner. Well, not a bed in the modern sense. It's more like a lumpy pile of straw, bundled in a coarse ticking sack and shared by the entire family. That's you, your spouse, 3 children, and sometimes the family pig. Not a joke. That pig is warm, and when you've got a cold draft creeping under every door and through every wall, you make strange alliances. Medieval sleeping arrangements were less about comfort and more about thermodynamics. Bodies meant heat, and when you're stacked like firewood, skin to skin under a shared blanket, if there is one, you at least have a fighting chance of making it to morning without your toes turning black. Sleeping like sardines is a luxury, though. Some homes didn't have the space or the straw. In those cases, you just made do on benches, near the hearth, or next to the door with a bit of cloak for coverage. Children often slept in the bed box, a small wooden frame with high sides meant to keep out drafts, or at least corral them. In wealthier peasant homes? Yes, that was a thing. You might find a separate sleep corner with actual bedding made of feathers or better processed wool, but for most, it was communal sleep or bust. And bust often meant cold, damp mornings with straw sticking to your ear and the chickens staring you down from a nearby perch. Because yes, animals in the house, totally normal. The family goat, the chickens, sometimes even a cow, all shared the space during winter. They weren't pets. They were walking heaters. Historians still debate just how common this was across regions. But in especially cold climates, Scandinavia, the Alps, even northern England, it's well documented. Not romantic, just practical. And here's the odd thing. This sardine-style living didn't just keep you warm, it kept you connected. You knew the sound of everyone's breath, every sneeze, every night terror. Privacy wasn't a medieval concept. You learned to share space, stories, and occasionally, someone's foot in your face. Nighttime routines were quick. Wash your hands. If there's water that isn't frozen, relieve yourself in the bucket. More on that lovely detail soon. Then crawl into the pile and hope your neighbor didn't eat garlic again. Sleep itself came in chunks. Historians describe first sleep and second sleep, a common pattern where people would wake up naturally in the middle of the night, over your head. It smells faintly of smoke and faintly of old onions. There's a draft curling in from the door, and you shove your feet toward the pig, who snorts in protest but doesn't move. Tomorrow will be just as cold. But for now, you're still here, still warm, still one of the sardines in the most efficient and least glamorous sleeping arrangement known to medieval kind. At some ungodly hour of night, though you wouldn't call it that, because clocks are a nobleman's toy. You jolt awake to a sound that might be the wind or might be something more serious. The fire's out again. Not just low, completely dead. No orange glow, no warm ash. Just cold stone, stiff fingers, and a nagging sense of dread. You shuffle toward the hearth, your toes shrieking with every step, and begin the nightly ritual, trying to bring the fire back to life. You rake through the ashes like a desperate archaeologist, hoping for even a whisper of warmth. Nothing. This is bad. Fire in winter isn't just about comfort. It's about survival. Without it, your soup stays cold, your water freezes solid, and your frost-bitten toes become a permanent fixture. You grab the kindling, damp twigs from the pile near the door, hopefully dry enough, a bit of straw, maybe some peat if you have it, which smells like a swamp but burns like a grudge, and then you blow. Gently, steadily, like you're coaxing a shy ghost from hiding. Historians still debate how consistent fire-keeping skills were among peasants. Some sources suggest families passed down specific fire-starting techniques, like sacred knowledge. Others imply people just gave up and froze half the time. Both could be true, depending on where you lived and how poor you were. If you lived in the Scottish Highlands or the boggy regions of Ireland, you might have relied on turf or dried animal dung. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it's surprisingly aromatic, like a barn wrapped in melancholy. In other places, brushwood or old thatch was common fuel. Wood was a luxury. Forest rights were tightly controlled, and gathering firewood could literally get you fined or whipped. You remember old Marta 2 villages over? She got caught dragging home a felled branch and had to clean the Lord's latrines for a month. And that's not the kind of job you bounce back from. You strike the flint again, and finally, a spark lands in the straw. A little thread of smoke. You breathe on it like it's your last hope, because in some ways, it is. When the fire catches, it's like a miracle. Light flickers against the low ceiling. The pig grunts in approval. You hold your hands out and feel your fingertips come back to life, like thawing slugs. You toss on another stick, small, not too greedy, and sit back, grateful for the warmth creeping up your sleeves. The room brightens enough to reveal outlines. The stool with the cracked leg, the child curled against the wall, your spouse muttering something incomprehensible in their sleep. You chuckle quietly. They always talk about cabbages in their dreams. The fire's up now, not ablaze, but enough to warm the air and scare off the cold's worst intentions. You feel powerful, like you've tamed nature with nothing but stubbornness and damp moss. Still, you have to ration the fuel. You can't burn through your whole pile before dawn. So you watch the flames, guarding them like a secret. You sip from a mug of weak ale, still slightly warm from being too close to the hearth, and wait for sleep to decide whether it's making a comeback tonight. The wind rattles the shutters. A cold draft curls around your ankles. Somewhere outside, a fox yelps, and you're reminded that warmth isn't a guarantee. It's a constant effort, a nightly battle against a world that doesn't care if you wake up frozen, but for now, the fire crackles. You're not comfortable, but you're surviving. One flame at a time. The fire holds barely, and you slide back under the covers. The mattress sighs, the pig grunts again, and a few minutes later, the room fills with the slow creak of settling beams and the ever-present wheeze of someone's winter congestion. You can't be sure if it's your spouse, your eldest daughter, or the pig, but you all sound about the same this time of year, and that's when it hits you, not the cold, though yes, still that, but the smoke. The room's air has changed, not warmer, just thicker. It crawls from the hearth and coils under the low ceiling like a guest overstaying its welcome. Your eyes water. You blink, cough once, and then ignore it. Because this is normal. Chimneys? You've heard of them. Maybe seen one sticking out of the manor house down the road. But for you? A smoke hole in the roof? Maybe, if you're lucky. More often, the smoke just finds its own way out. Or doesn't. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant homes had intentional ventilation or just learned to live with permanent eye irritation. The general consensus? You adapt. You stop noticing. And eventually you start to believe that soot-stained rafters are just character. Smoke isn't just an inconvenience. It's a survival strategy. It curls through the thatched roof, helping to dry out damp straw and discourage pests. Mice, spiders, and the occasional bird think twice about setting up camp above your bed if the air tastes like firewood and regrets. In fact, smoke doubles as medieval pest control. Who needs bug spray when you can fumigate the entire house nightly with your lungs? But the benefits don't stop there. The thickened air also helps preserve meat. If you're fortunate enough to hang a side of bacon or a few sausages near the rafters, the smoke will give them that nice, unintentional hickory flavor while keeping the mold at bay. Just ignore the occasional spider cocoon wrapped delicately around the string. Some families took pride in how long their roofs could hold onto smoke. A lingering haze meant the warmth stayed in. You could walk into a neighbor's home and judge their heating situation by how quickly your eyes started burning. Still, it's not all cozy flickers and rustic ambiance. Prolonged smoke inhalation has consequences. Your lungs ache in winter. Children develop that familiar bark of a cough before they can walk. And elderly folks, they either become immune legends or quietly vanish before spring. You rub your sleeve across your face, trying to clear your eyes. A few tears trickle down, but it's not emotion. Just good, old-fashioned chimneyless charm. And yet, there's a kind of intimacy to it. The way the smoke softens the light, blurs the harsh edges of your home, hides the stains on the walls and the cracks in the daub. The way it smells like every meal you've ever cooked, every night you've survived. Evenings are spent huddled near the hearth, with smoke weaving through candlelight as you and your family sit silently, or maybe grumble about the cold together. You can't see the stars, but you can hear the wind, and sometimes that's enough. You blow your nose, tuck the blanket higher, and stare up at the ceiling. You can almost see shapes in the smoke, like bedtime stories forming themselves. A fox with antlers, a fish with legs, a castle in the clouds that smells faintly of turnips. There's beauty in it, if you squint. And for now, as your eyes sting and your fingers slowly regain sensation, you realize something strange. This is home. This smoky, creaky, half-frozen box filled with mismatched shoes, wheezing children, and one pig who now appears to be snoring in harmony with your spouse. You let your eyes close and let the smoke do the insulating. The fire's embers glow faintly now, and your stomach growls with that special winter kind of hunger, the one that isn't just craving food, but warmth too. It's nearly morning, which means it's time for breakfast, or as you think of it, hot liquid that pretends to be food. You ease yourself up from bed, limbs stiff, neck creaking like a timber beam, and pad over to the cook pot still hanging above the hearth. It's never truly empty. In fact, it's more of a permanent installation than a meal prep device. You don't cook meals from scratch. You top off an ever-simmering stew that's been bubbling for days, weeks, potentially since the last full moon. This is pottage, the great equalizer of medieval cuisine. You throw in grains, root vegetables, the occasional herb, and if you're lucky, maybe a strip of salted pork or a leftover chicken bone. The idea isn't gourmet. The idea is, will this give me enough energy to chop wood, feed animals, and not die today? You ladle out a bowl, noticing it's thicker than usual, a good sign. Someone must have found a carrot yesterday. The warmth hits your fingers first, then seeps into your chest with each spoonful. It's bland, it's beige, it's life-giving, and yes, the pig is watching you eat. Soup and stew were vital to winter survival, not just for warmth, but because they made the most out of very little. Bread, when available, was hard as roof tiles by morning. Dipping it in stew made it edible, or at least soft enough to not chip a tooth. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had consistent access to meat in their pottage or only on rare occasions. Records vary. Some seasons were bountiful, others saw meals stretch into near starvation. You remember a winter where onions were the highlight of every dish. Raw, stewed, or slightly burnt. Onions were your best friend and worst breath. You stir the pot with a wooden spoon so old it's more notch than handle. One of the kids grumbles from the bed, asking if there's honey. You laugh, not because it's a joke, but because it's been years since you've seen a drop. Honey is for monks and weddings, and you're not either of those today. Instead, you hand them a chunk of turnip, vaguely warm, and tell them to chew slowly. It'll taste better if they imagine it's something sweet. That's not entirely a lie. Your grandmother used to say flavor lives in your thoughts, not your tongue. Then again, she also thought sneezes were caused by fairies. Another child asks for ale, not because they're trying to start early, but because water is a gamble this time of year. It freezes overnight, and even if it didn't, it's probably contaminated. Ale, weak and watery as it may be, is safer. It warms you, settles your belly, and makes the cold slightly less noticeable, or slightly more amusing. Both are useful. You hand them a cup and watch them sip, lips chapped, nose red, eyes still bleary. It's a quiet moment. The fire hums, the pig snuffles, the wind tries and fails to sneak through the door's cloth cover. Sometimes, when your pottage turns out just right, you feel a strange pride, like you've outwitted the season. You've turned scraps and weeds into survival. You didn't need a feast. You needed heat in a bowl. And if you close your eyes just long enough, with the spoon warming your fingers and the steam kissing your nose, you can almost imagine it tastes like something special. Maybe a roast, maybe a pie, maybe just hope. You finish your portion and scrape the bowl clean. Nothing is wasted. Not in this house, not in this season, and certainly not in this century. As the bowl clinks softly on the floor beside the hearth, you reach for your cup. Not water, not milk, not even tea. It's ale, weak, brown, and a little bit sour, like someone once tried to make it taste nice and then gave up halfway through. You raise it to your lips with both hands, more for the warmth than the flavor. Ale isn't a treat. It's breakfast. It's hydration. It's medieval multivitamins with a hint of yeast. Most peasants, yes, even children, drink small ale daily. It's mildly alcoholic, but not enough to start a tavern brawl at dawn. Just enough to avoid the dicey business of unboiled water. You sip, and it warms your chest. The kids pass around the cup like it's sacred, and for a moment, no one is cold. Not truly. Not yet. Historians still debate how nutritious small ale really was, or if it was just the best option in a world where water was often safer with a dash of fermentation. But what we do know, brewing was a household craft, often handled by women. Every village had at least one brewer, and if they were good, they were worth their weight in salted fish. You brewed some ale last week, actually. Turned out decent. A bit cloudy, but it didn't kill anyone. That's a win. Your spouse once tried to make an herbal version, with nettles, cloves, and something unidentifiable from the woods. It tasted like boiled socks. The kids still tell the story whenever anyone mentions experimental brewing. Still, ale wasn't just about staying hydrated. It was social. If the stew pot was the center of your household, the ale mug was the soul of your gossip network. You could hear everything while sipping from a communal cup at the fire. Whose chickens escaped again? Whose roof is leaking? Which villager is definitely cursed because his goats keep walking backward? And it helped you sleep, or at least not care so much when you couldn't. In winter, that mattered more than you'd like to admit. Sometimes you sip more than you should. On bitter nights when the wind sounds like it's screaming your name, you drink just enough to forget the holes in the wall, the ache in your knees, and the fact that your pig has started sleeping in your spot. But other times, like now, it's just a quiet companion, a small comfort in a world of constant cold. You lean back, cup in hand, and watch the children nudge each other over stew scraps and blanket space. The pig grumbles, but stays put. Even he knows this is the warmest place he's going to get. Soon you'll have to go outside. There's wood to chop, snow to clear, goats to nudge toward the trough. But for now, the ale is warm, the fire is holding, and your breath only fogs the air a little. It's not joy, but it's not misery either. It's just winter, with a side of yeast. You step outside and instantly regret every decision that led to this moment. The cold doesn't hit, it slaps. It wraps around your legs like a wet bedsheet from the gods of discomfort. Your breath clouds the air in sharp little puffs, and your toes start negotiating with your brain. 5 more minutes out here and we're gone. For real this time. But the animals need tending, and they're just as cold and grumpy as you. You trudge across the frosted yard, past the wooden fence that leans like it had a rough night, toward the shed where your chickens sleep and your goats pretend to be useful. The pig has remained inside because he's cleverer than all of you combined. The animals aren't pets, they're co-workers. Co-workers who scream at you in the mornings and provide heat in exchange for food and barely livable conditions. It's an agreement, one based on mutual survival and daily passive aggression. Chickens first. You unlatch the coop door and are met with a wall of squawking, fluttering rage. They're not thrilled about the weather either. You reach for the feed sack, grains and scraps, whatever's left, and scatter it across the frozen ground. They peck and complain. You nod in sympathy. Historians still argue whether peasants truly kept animals inside their homes full-time or just during the worst cold snaps. The truth? Probably both. You don't want a goat chewing your bedpost, but you do want to wake up with feeling in your legs. It's a trade-off. Goats next. You open the pen and get a hoof to the shin. Morning greetings from Beatrix. She's always been like that. Bad attitude, strong milk. You pull hay from the loft and toss it into the trough, fingers going numb with each movement. The goats munch like it's their final meal. It's not. You'll be back out again before nightfall because animals don't understand the concept of scheduling. You remember the time your cow got loose during a snowstorm, wandered into the woods, and came back 3 days later with a squirrel nest in her tail and a new attitude. You still call her the Baroness because she refuses to make eye contact. Animals were warmth in a world that offered very little. At night, they curled in straw corners and radiated heat like squat little furnaces. You've fallen asleep more than once with a chicken roosting under your arm and a goat breathing down your neck. Romance? Number survival? Absolutely. You once had a neighbor, old Alwyn, who swore by sleeping with 2 sheep and a jug of ale. Said the sheep kept his feet warm, and the ale kept him from remembering the sheep. You miss him sometimes, mostly for his stories. With the animals fed and slightly less annoyed, you stomp your feet to get the blood moving again. The sun peeks over the treetops now, casting long shadows on the frost-crusted ground. It doesn't warm anything, really. It just makes the cold more visible. Still, you take a breath. Cold and sharp, but clean. The kind of air that wakes up your bones and makes your nose feel like it's being sandpapered from the inside. You trudge back toward the house, watching your own footprints in the snow. Inside, the fire will be low, the stew slightly congealed, and the pig will probably have stolen your seat again. But that's okay, because for a few frozen minutes this morning, you were outside, alive, and surrounded by animals that, somehow, are as much your winter allies as they are your breakfast insurance. You're barely inside before the cold clings to your clothes like gossip to a tavern wall. You stomp the frost from your boots, rub your hands together, and head straight for your least favorite morning ritual, the chamber pot. Ah, yes, the bucket of shame. It sits quietly in the corner, pretending it didn't just host the entire household's overnight business. Frost rims the edges. The lid, a scrap of wood really, is slightly ajar, and you know from experience that lifting it means committing to the reality of winter plumbing. There's no privacy. None. Not for you, not for anyone else in the family, and certainly not for the goat who wanders over and watches with what feels like judgment. The pot is used by everyone, children, elders, guests, if you're fancy enough to have them. It's a great equalizer. Everyone pees. Everyone deals with it. And it is cold. The kind of cold that makes you rethink every sip of ale you had the night before. Historians still argue about the range of waste management techniques among medieval peasants. Some homes had designated privy sheds, usually little more than a plank over a pit. Others made use of chamber pots and emptied them every morning, ideally away from the water source, though mistakes were made. Many, many mistakes. You carry the pot out gingerly, trying not to spill. The contents slosh dangerously as you head toward the dumping area, far enough from the well to avoid a visit from the village priest, but close enough that your hands don't freeze solid before you get there. Once emptied, you rinse it with a scoop of water from a slushy barrel. That's hygiene. That's considered good hygiene. You know families who don't bother rinsing. They just keep going. Their houses smell like medieval regret. Yours, by contrast, only smells like stew, smoke, and mild embarrassment. And for the other kind of business, if you're in the fields all day, you find a bush, a fence post, or just a quiet corner with a good view. It's not glamorous, but it does come with fresh air and occasionally a moment of solitude. You remember the time old Gwen from 3 houses down accidentally used stinging nettles in the dark. She spent the next week sitting very, very gently on a sack of oats. Never again. Children are trained early in the art of avoiding frozen pants. They learn to go quickly, quietly, and with remarkable aim, especially if there's snow. Yellow circles around the house become a kind of informal perimeter map. You finish with the pot and set it back in its corner, lid closed, dignity moderately intact. No one applauds, but someone should. You've braved the bucket. You've performed a necessary act of survival. And you didn't spill. That's a win. Now you stretch your arms, scratch your head, and realize it's still morning, still freezing, still a full day ahead. But at least the worst is behind you. for now. And as you pass the hearth on your way back to your stool, you give the chamber pot one last look, not out of fondness, just to make sure it's not steaming. The fire crackles quietly as you lower yourself onto the stool nearest the hearth, your unofficial throne during the frozen months. It's not comfortable, but it's warm, and at this point, those two qualities haven't overlapped in weeks. You rest your hands on your knees, shoulders hunched, breath steady, and for a rare, fleeting moment, there's peace. Outside, the cold continues its siege, but inside, you've managed to hold the line, for now. It's quiet, not silent, never truly silent, but quieter than usual. No one's crying. The pig is asleep. Even the rooster is apparently reconsidering his life choices and hasn't crowed yet. This quiet has weight. It's the cold kind. Not menacing, not dangerous, just still. Rural winter silence isn't like modern silence. It's not peaceful with a candle and a cup of cocoa. It's the kind of silence where you hear every creak of wood, every groan of the thatched roof, every breath escaping from the sleeping child curled on the floor near your foot. You hear the wind pressing against the shutter like it's testing for weaknesses. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants feared the quiet or embraced it. On the one hand, it meant the wolves weren't near. On the other, it reminded you just how far you were from everything and everyone. When the snow piled up high enough, your little cottage might as well have been a boat floating on a white sea, adrift, alone, and squeaking in the dark. You shift on your stool, trying to decide if your toes are numb or just dramatically underperforming. The fire doesn't help much anymore. It's small now, a sleepy flicker of orange holding out against the creeping gray of morning. The stew in the pot doesn't bubble. It just exists, tired and tepid, like everyone else. The children are stirring. They grumble softly, stretch their arms, slap their cheeks to bring color back. Your spouse mutters something about the goat chewing on a shoe again. You nod. The quiet is almost over. Outside, a crow calls, the first real sound of the day, and in the strange acoustics of winter, it sounds closer than it is, like it's perched right on your shoulder. You glance out the window, a hole in the wall with oiled parchment stretched tight, and see pale light beginning to creep over the snowy fields. Everything is still, and everything is cold. You remember once, as a child, walking outside just before dawn and hearing nothing. No birds, no wind, no voices, just the sound of your own heart. You stood there for what felt like hours, convinced that if you moved, the whole world would notice. That's the kind of quiet this morning has, the kind where every thought seems louder. You reach down, pull your wool cloak tighter, and let yourself sit in the silence a little longer. Let it settle in your bones. It's not fear, not sadness, just space. Space to feel the weight of winter, the heaviness of survival, and the small, stubborn comfort of having made it through another night. Someone sneezes. The spell breaks. The pig snorts. The day begins. The sun is barely up, casting a silvery glow through the cracks in your shutters when you rise to inspect your most prized possession, the blanket. Not just a blanket, the family heirloom, the heavy woolen square that has survived more winters than any of your relatives. You lift it from the straw bed, shaking off bits of hay, pig hair, and a small child's sock. It's thick, coarse, slightly moth-eaten, and smells like smoke and survival. If this blanket could talk, it would probably sigh and say, "Still? Another winter?" Blankets in medieval peasant homes weren't decorations. They were status. They were legacy. Owning one wasn't guaranteed. Many families relied on layered tunics, old cloaks, or even animal hides for warmth. But if you had a true, honest-to-goodness blanket, especially wool, you were living large. Historians still debate whether these items were homemade or purchased through barter. In most cases, it was both. Your great-aunt might have carded the wool herself, and someone else in the village helped with the weaving. In return, you probably owed them 6 chickens and 2 sacks of barley, payable over 3 harvests. And the value? Immense. Blankets were so valuable, they often appeared in wills, listed right alongside livestock and tools. People passed them down like land. To my eldest son, I bequeath the plow. To my youngest daughter, the blanket and 1 angry goat. Fair. You refold it gently, carefully placing it near the hearth to dry from last night's dampness. Not too close. You've heard of entire homes going up in flames over a singed wool hem. The kind of mistake you only make once. Your neighbor, Malin, has 3 blankets. 3. One of them is lined with fur. People talk. Some say her cousin is a weaver for the manor house. Others suspect witchcraft. You don't judge. But you've absolutely asked to borrow one during a particularly cruel frost. She declined. Politely, but firmly. Blankets doubled as cloaks, shawls, baby carriers, and on one unforgettable occasion, a sled. That was a wild morning. Your youngest son slid down a frozen hill with the blanket wrapped around him like a cape. He came back with frostbitten ears and the biggest smile you'd seen in months. They were also a form of diplomacy. You once settled an argument with your cousin over a broken cartwheel by loaning him your patch blanket for 2 weeks. He returned it with a new patch stitched in. Ugly, yes, but functional. You gently tug at a loose thread now, remembering. That patch? From a year when a late frost killed all the cabbage and you had to eat boiled onions for 3 weeks. You'd never felt colder, or more determined to never live like that again. Blankets told stories. This one, yours, carries generations of them. A tear near the edge from when you tripped over the hearthstone. A red stain from the one time you dared to eat stewed berries in bed. A slightly melted corner from a close call with a falling candle. Every mark is a memory. Every fray, a footnote. The children fight over who gets the middle spot when it's bedtime. You always win, because seniority has its privileges, and cold feet are a powerful motivator. And when guests visit, which is rare in winter, the blanket comes out like a trophy. Look upon my finely woven survival rectangle and despair, you poorly insulated peasants. You smooth it down, tuck it aside, and sigh with satisfaction. It's not beautiful, it's not soft, but it's yours. And in a world where warmth is never promised, owning a single stubborn blanket feels like winning. With the fire revived, the stew stirred, and the blanket safely drying near the hearth. It's time to begin what passes for a warm-up, doing actual work. Not because you're inspired, but because if you sit still too long in this kind of cold, your limbs might just seize up and file for early retirement. So you head outside again, breath puffing out in cartoonish clouds, and grab the axe. It's blunt, heavy, and slightly cursed, based on how often it lands an inch away from where you aimed. But it's your main tool in the ongoing war against winter. You're going to chop firewood until your arms forget that they're cold and remember that they're made of spite. The wood pile is humble, a stack of logs scavenged over the past months, some from fallen branches, others traded or borrowed with promises you've completely forgotten. You set the first log on the block, take a deep breath, and swing. Thud. Not a clean split, of course. It lands at a weird angle and vibrates up through your shoulder. You grunt, reset, swing again. The axe sinks in better this time, sending a spray of frost and splinters into the air like rustic fireworks. This isn't just busy work, it's body heat. Every swing is a rebellion against frozen toes. Every log split is a minute closer to not being miserable. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had enough wood to keep warm throughout winter, or whether they were forced to burn animal dung, thatch, or even furniture. In reality, most used a combination of whatever wouldn't scream when lit. Dung was common, smelly, but reliable. Thatch worked in a pinch, though it left the roof complaining. You've even burned broken cartwheels once, and let's not talk about how you acquired those. The chopping warms you quickly. You peel off a layer, not because it's pleasant out, but because now you're sweating under your mystery fur cloak. The cold air hits your skin, but it's oddly refreshing. Brief relief before your hands go numb again. Children run past you, squealing and slipping on patches of packed snow. They're not helping. Of course not, but you don't blame them. When you were their age, your job was, don't fall in the fire and stop hitting your brother with a turnip. Expectations have changed slightly. Next chore, hauling water. The well isn't far, but in winter, it might as well be the moon. You grab the yoke, sling the buckets, and start the awkward, shoulder-straining march across the crunchy yard. The well has a layer of ice this morning. Not surprising. You chip it away with a metal ladle and drop the bucket in. It hits the water with a splash that makes your teeth ache in sympathy. Hauling it back up, you brace for the slosh, the tilt, the inevitable splash down your leg. Because winter water never lands where you want it to. You carry the full buckets inside like a returning hero. No applause. Just two sleepy children squabbling over who gets to hold the warmest end of the spoon. And as you pour the water into a basin near the fire, your fingers tingling with cold and pride, you feel it again. The strange medieval satisfaction of working so hard just to be slightly less uncomfortable. Because that's what it is, really. You don't work for wealth, or status, or fulfillment. You work to be warm. Back inside now, your sleeves damp, your muscles sore in the quiet, pulsing way that lets you know you're still alive. You sit near the hearth once again, and for a few minutes, you allow yourself something rare in winter. Stillness. But your neighbor doesn't. There's a knock. Well, not so much a knock as a gloved hand slapping the doorframe in that unmistakable, I have bad news, or a stupid request kind of way. You already know which neighbor it is by the rhythm of the slap. 3 short, 1 long, followed by a muttered curse. It's Thomas. Again. You open the door to find him bundled in layers that look suspiciously like curtains, and what might be a fox pelt tied to his head. His breath fogs between you. Wife says our cat's possessed, he says. Do you have any sage? Of course you don't. But you invite him in, mostly because the alternative is standing there letting the house get colder. He stomps snow off his boots and sits heavily on your second stool, the one with a loose leg. He holds out his hands to the fire, and then, without prompting, launches into a rant about the frost on his windows spelling out letters and how he suspects it's either a divine warning or a prank by local spirits. You nod sympathetically. This is winter conversation. Because when you're this cold, when your world is narrowed down to a few square meters and the same 4 walls, you need more than food and fire. You need meaning. And meaning, in a medieval peasant village, often came wrapped in superstition and small, whispered hopes. Thomas tells you how his grandmother used to tie bundles of herbs above the door to keep out snow ghosts. You nod again. You've heard worse theories. Historians still argue how widespread and sincere medieval folk beliefs were. Were they acts of deep faith, or just tradition passed down for lack of better explanations? Either way, when your house creaks in the wind and the sky spits sleet for the third day straight, you find yourself reaching for rituals. You light a candle. Not for light, but because someone once said it keeps the spirits from gathering too close. You toss a pinch of salt by the door because an elder swore it confuses evil. You say a quiet prayer, not formal, not Latin, just a muttered line in your own words about making it to spring. Superstition is survival for the soul. You've made charms before, bits of string, bird bones, the occasional coin tied to a twig. You hang them in the rafters or bury them under the hearth, not because you think they'll change the weather, but because doing something, anything, helps you feel less helpless. Tomas finishes his ale and leans back, eyes on the low ceiling. Think we'll get more snow? You shrug. Depends what the crows say. He nods solemnly. They were arguing this morning. That settles it. He heads out again, into the white light of late morning. You close the door behind him, fingers pausing over the latch, then casually toss a few sprigs of dried mint into the fire, just in case the cat is possessed. Can't hurt. And as you settle back near the hearth, the warmth finally creeping into your chest again, you whisper a few words of your own, not a spell, not a prayer, just a quiet hope wrapped in breath and smoke. Let this fire hold. Let the cold pass. Let tomorrow come. The afternoon inches forward, not with warmth, but with light, the kind of pale, stingy daylight that never truly reaches inside. You step out to the path, the ground crunching beneath your boots, and see a thin stream of villagers heading toward the edge of the square. Someone's lighting the festival fire. It's St. Bridget's Day, or Candlemas, or just that day we set things on fire and pretend we're not freezing. Whatever you call it, it's one of the few bright spots in the bleak rhythm of winter. Winter festivals were less about celebration and more about necessity. People needed excuses to leave the house, to gather, to remind themselves that life was still happening, even if their toes couldn't feel it. And this one? It came with fire, dancing, and the highly anticipated appearance of hot things to drink that don't taste like despair. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the trail of neighbors. The air smells of wood smoke and animal fat. Someone's already turning a spit near the central fire. Not a feast exactly, but food cooked outside always tastes different, like something earned. The villagers gather in layers so thick you could lose a child in a neighbor's sleeve. The fire roars in the center and everyone edges close, not too close, it still spits, but enough to warm hands and faces. Children dart between legs, shrieking in that winter-born ecstasy that comes from being able to run without slipping every 3 steps. There's music, if you can call it that. A flute with a cracked reed, a drum made from a stretched pig bladder, and one man who insists on singing a half-remembered song about cabbage. It's beautiful, in its own slightly miserable way. Historians still argue whether these midwinter festivals were more rooted in Christian observance or older pre-Christian traditions. But for you and your neighbors, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there's light, heat, and maybe, just maybe, a shared pie crust if someone brought one. You huddle near old Anselm, who claims his beard once caught fire during a Yule dance and that his eyebrows never grew back the same. You believe him, mostly because his eyebrows do indeed look like startled caterpillars. The village priest mumbles a blessing over the flames, and people nod solemnly, though half are just pretending they understood him. Latin doesn't translate well when your ears are frozen. Someone passes a cup of mulled ale, thick, warm, spiced with cloves and wishful thinking. You take a sip. It burns a little, but that's part of the charm. And suddenly, just for a moment, you don't mind winter so much. This is why festivals matter. Not because they make things better, but because they remind you that things won't always be this bad. That warmth exists, that laughter survives, that humans, for all their grumbling, will find ways to gather around a flame and make up songs about root vegetables. You toss a log onto the fire, listen to it hiss and pop, and lean in with your neighbors. You're not warm, not really, but you're warmer, and not alone. The sun dips lower, but no one leaves just yet. It's the coldest part of the year, but this is what thaws people. Tomorrow, you'll be chopping wood again, hauling buckets, bargaining with the pig for bed space. But tonight, you share stories and ale and cracked songs beneath the smoke-blurred stars. And for one long, flickering evening, winter feels a little bit like a friend. By the time you return from the village fire, your cloak smells like smoke, your fingers are pink and stiff, and your feet feel like they've walked to the next century. But your face is warm, and there's a lingering grin on your lips, a muscle memory of laughter shared over bad cider and worse singing. Back inside, the cottage is quiet again. The stew pot simmers faintly. The children have curled back into their straw nests, and the pig, naturally, has claimed the warmest spot near the hearth and is snoring like a middle-aged blacksmith. You lower yourself onto the stool and rub your hands, still humming a mangled version of that root vegetable waltz old Thomas insists is a sacred song from his ancestors. You'll never get it out of your head now. Night settles in fast in winter. The air cools, the shadows stretch longer, and the silence thickens again. But tonight, it's not the eerie kind. It's the cozy kind. The kind that wraps itself around candlelight and leftover stories. As the fire burns lower, someone lights a stub of tallow candle and places it near the wall. The flickering glow dances over rough wooden beams and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Time slows. The world softens. You sit with your eldest daughter, who's decided to be awake just long enough to complain about the draft. You both lean into the firelight, and that's when it happens. The real entertainment of any long winter night. Storytelling, not the formal kind, not tales of saints or kings, but the local stuff, the neighbor gossip woven into folklore, the village folklore tangled with absolute nonsense, the stuff that keeps your minds warm when your toes can't be bothered. Remember the time Edda's chicken laid 2 eggs and one was blue? You nod. Of course you do. It was discussed for a month, probably cursed, possibly blessed. Either way, you haven't eaten her eggs since. Your daughter giggles and wraps the blanket tighter around her shoulders. What about when Bryn claimed he saw a ghost in the barley field, but it turned out to be a goat in a veil? Still think the goat was up to something, you reply. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants truly believed in every tale they passed down, or whether the stories were just ways to make life more bearable. Probably both. When you live in a world where the wind sounds like a voice and frost creeps across the walls at night, it's not hard to imagine spirits hiding behind hedgerows or witches living 2 cottages down. Someone starts a tale about the frozen widow, a woman who wandered the hills in winter, tapping on windows and asking for bread, but who was made entirely of snow. You don't know where the story came from. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's just a reflection of everyone's shared hunger and fear, turned into a face and a voice. There's comfort in these stories. They're half memory, half warning, half entertainment. Yes, that's too many halves, but no one's counting in this room. And all of them end the same way, with someone surviving, even if just barely. Even if they had to outwit a demon or share their stew with a talking fox. The candle gutters. Your daughter nods off mid-sentence. You pull the blanket over her shoulder and stretch out your legs. The fire whispers. The wind grumbles against the wall. And you think, just for a moment, that you could live forever in this strange, smoky little world. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And because, on nights like this, when the stories are good and the pig isn't snoring too loud, it almost feels like the cold has forgotten where you live. The candle burns low. The fire has receded to a dull red blush in the hearth, and your stomach gives that unmistakable growl, not loud, just persistent. It's the kind of hunger you don't bother announcing. Everyone else feels it too. Because this far into winter, food is abstract. You shuffle to the pantry, or what passes for it. A nook carved into the wall, stacked with baskets, crocks, and the occasional dried surprise. You open one, hoping for dried apples. Nope. Just 3 confused beans and a questionable onion. There's a moment of deliberation. Do you cook it? Do you save it for tomorrow? Or do you just stare at it long enough for it to turn into soup by sheer guilt? In the end, you settle on a thin slice of hard cheese and a piece of rye bread so dense it could deflect arrows. You gnaw slowly, carefully, listening to the room around you sleep. Winter hunger isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's the slow realization that the salted meat is gone, the dried peas didn't last, and you've got 2 turnips left to feed 5 people. And one of them is the pig, who, by the way, is not unaware of this fact. Historians still argue how common starvation was for medieval peasants. Famines were recorded in manorial accounts and church logs, but the day-to-day scarcities, the days when dinner was broth and a sniff of bacon fat, those weren't written down. You lived them. You endured them. And then you kept going. You remember a winter when the stew was mostly bark. No one said it aloud, but we all knew. Or the spring where the only green thing was nettles. You ate them anyway and told the children they'd make their hair grow. Didn't matter if it was true. Hope has a flavor too. Preservation techniques helped. Salting, drying, smoking, but only if you had something to preserve. Most times, food preservation was less about technique and more about divine intervention and a lucky pig that didn't wander off. You glance over at your pig. He lifts one eyelid like he knows. One day, maybe, but not yet. You chew slowly, savoring the cheese even though it's older than your second cousin and tastes faintly of cellar walls. The bread is tough, but your teeth are tougher. Barely. Your youngest stirs in sleep and mumbles, dreamed of honey cakes. You smile and wrap the blanket tighter around them. Dreams taste better than most things you can afford anyway. You once heard that monks in distant lands eat figs, almonds, dried dates soaked in wine. Maybe they do. Maybe those things are real. But here, in your cottage, on this night, dinner is dried rye, a scrap of hard cheese, and a memory of what sweetness used to taste like. But you're alive. You're full enough to sleep. And tomorrow, you'll boil the last onion and tell everyone it's stew. Again. Because in the end, winter doesn't demand happiness. It just demands endurance. And you, tired and hungry and slightly amused at the pig's snoring, still have plenty of that left. You slip off your shoes, or more accurately, your stiff, straw-stuffed leather suggestions of shoes, and sit down on the edge of the straw bed, rubbing your feet with palms that have known too many winters. The chill hasn't left them, not really. It's nested in your toes like a squatter with no intention of moving out. Footwear in winter is optimistic at best. Socks, as you'd know them today, haven't yet reached your village. What you have are wrappings, strips of cloth, bits of wool, sometimes even scraps of old tunics twisted around your ankles in a hopeful spiral. Some folks get fancy and stuff straw or moss inside their shoes. And yes, it does work. Until it doesn't. And suddenly you're walking on soggy salad. You reach under the bed for your wrapping cloth. It's still damp from this morning, but at least it's not frozen. You rub it between your hands, warm it near the hearth, and wrap it again around your feet. Tight, but not too tight. Circulation is the only thing standing between your toes and an early retirement. Historians still debate whether peasants' winter footwear truly helped prevent frostbite or just delayed it. Most agree that peasants in colder climates had seasonal solutions, stuffing fur into boots, layering wrappings, or in some places using leg tubes, which were like woolen gaiters tied over the calf. You once tried that, looked heroic, tripped immediately. As for shoes themselves, they're handmade, of course. Cobblers in the village keep busy all year, but in winter, they're the unsung heroes, patching holes with waxed thread, layering leather with wax or tallow, doing anything short of divine intervention to keep your souls attached. Your current pair is mismatched. One a hand-me-down from a cousin with impressively wide feet, the other a gift from your brother after his pig chewed through the heel. Together, they almost make a shoe. Almost. Still, you manage. You keep a flat rock near the hearth just for warming your shoes in the morning. It doesn't help much, but it makes you feel clever. You once tried to dry your foot wraps by hanging them near the fire. They caught. You still hear about that. But feet aren't just for walking. They're for feeling. If your feet are warm, you can survive anything. If they're cold, well, everything hurts a little more. You've curled up in bed some nights, feet in your spouse's lap, because human thighs are the closest thing to a heated blanket you'll ever know. There's a story your grandfather told about a man whose feet were so cold he slept standing up in a barrel of coals, lost both legs, kept the barrel, used it as a cradle. You're 60% sure that's a lie, but you never forget it when your feet go numb. Tonight, though, you've done your best. You've rubbed, wrapped, and tucked your feet deep into the straw bed, right up against the pig's back. He grunts, annoyed but tolerant. He understands. You're both trying to survive the same season. You breathe deep. The smell of leather, wool, and animal warmth fills the air. Your toes tingle. You shift. You sigh. And for now, just now, your feet aren't cold. And that's enough. Just when your limbs begin to loosen and your brain starts to soften around the edges, a familiar ache rises behind your eyes and down your spine. That dull, nagging throb that winter never fails to deliver. You're not ill, exactly. But you're also not ill. You're winter sick. A charming blend of damp, cold, and the accumulated exhaustion of sleeping next to livestock and eating nostalgia-flavored stew. You shift under the blanket and cough once, dry and unsatisfying. No one stirs. It's not alarming. Everyone has their own version. Your youngest wheezes like a broken bellows. Your spouse has a sniffle that's more rhythmic than the village drum. Getting sick in medieval winter is more a lifestyle than an event. You know how this goes. You wrap yourself tighter. You sip warm water, if it's not frozen. You chew a dried root someone once claimed would help balance your humors. You don't know which humors are being balanced, but your tongue has gone numb, so it's doing something. Herbal remedies are the peasant's answer to everything. A cough, thyme tea, a fever, elderflower. chilblains. Rub on goose fat and hope for divine favor. And if all else fails, garlic. Always garlic. You're pretty sure if you died and were dug up 2 centuries later, you'd still smell faintly of garlic. Historians still argue whether these folk treatments were effective or simply traditional comfort rituals. But honestly, sometimes believing the tea will help is just as powerful as the tea itself. And there's something soothing about brewing a concoction your great-grandmother swore by, especially when she lived to be 94 and was only bitten by a goose twice. You shuffle to the shelf near the hearth and pull down your collection of dried herbs. It's mostly weeds, if you're being honest, but they look important. You crush a few into a cup, pour in hot water, and sip slowly. Bitter, earthy, slightly like licking the inside of a wooden shoe. You sit by the fire, wrapping your cloak around your shoulders and thinking of your old neighbor who used to insist that sickness was just the devil testing your insulation. She'd sit on a rock outside her door and scream into the wind. Said it cleared her lungs. She died at 83, mid-sentence, probably about the devil again. You cough once more, then lean back against the wall. The candle flickers. Your knees ache, your chest rattles, and you think, maybe spring will fix this, but you know better. You're not expecting a cure, just hoping it doesn't get worse. You listen to the pig breathing, the steady, soft whistle of your daughter's nose, the creaking beams overhead. These sounds have been with you every winter of your life, like a song that changes key but never stops playing. So you drink your herbal brew, tuck your feet closer to the warmth, and remind yourself you've survived this kind of sick before. You'll survive it again, and maybe, if the wind dies down, you'll sleep tonight without coughing yourself awake. You doze for a while, drifting in and out of sleep like a leaf on a slow-moving stream. But it's not deep rest, not really. It's the kind of sleep you get when your body's trying to power down, but the world keeps poking you with a stick. Someone shifts nearby. A snore sharpens into a snort. The pig kicks in his sleep and hits the bedpost with an indignant grunt. You sigh and roll over, trying to find a patch of straw that isn't poking you in the spine. Privacy? Forget it. In a medieval peasant household, privacy is as fictional as summer warmth in February. There are no bedrooms, no walls, no quiet corners to sneak away to. It's all one room, one fire, one blanket, and roughly 12 different breathing sounds at any given time. You pull the cloak over your head. It helps. A little. The children stir. One mumbles something about a hot apple, and you want to weep at the sheer innocence of that dream. Another rolls over and mutters in sleep, clobbering you in the ribs with an elbow. Love, medieval style. Your spouse grumbles, flips over, and steals half the blanket. Again. You tug it back. Again. Historians still argue whether the lack of privacy in peasant homes impacted relationships or strengthened community bonds. Some argue it created unity, no secrets, no space to hide. Others suggest it bred resentment and constant low-level irritation, especially during long winters. You lean toward the latter. You've watched 2 brothers almost come to blows over a single spoon. You've seen toddlers cry because someone else breathed on their potato. And you? You've fantasized about a door you could close, just once. But there's also comfort in it. When the wind howls, when the cold sneaks in through every crack, when the night is long and the stew is thin, there's something undeniably human about being packed into a single room with everyone you love, and sometimes barely tolerate. You know each other's rhythms. You can tell who's getting sick just by the way they shift under the blanket. You know when someone's dreaming. You know the difference between a bad cough and a get the herbs cough. It's intimate, and sometimes overwhelming, but mostly it's just life. In the darkness, you hear someone whisper, "Are you awake?" You lie. A pause. Then, "I had a dream I was a goose." You smile under the blanket. That explains the flapping. You mutter. They giggle. Then quiet again. The fire has died down to little more than a glow now, just enough to sketch shadows across the rafters and warm the soles of your feet if you hold them just right. You can hear the wind brushing against the shutters, testing them, reminding you that the world outside is still brutal and vast. But inside, it's cramped, loud, a little smelly. But it's alive. And in winter, that's the real luxury. The sky begins to pale. Just a whisper of light at the edges, barely enough to call morning, but enough for your body to know it's time to move again. You sit up slowly, every joint objecting. The pig rolls over with a grunt. Someone's foot is inexplicably under your back. You don't ask. It's the first thaw. Not spring, no, not yet. Just the early muddy flirtation of a change in season. A trickle under the snowbank, a drip from the eaves, a smell you haven't noticed in months. Damp earth, old straw, wet wood, the scent of life re-entering the soil. You open the door and step outside. It's still cold. Your breath still curls in the air like smoke. But the wind has changed. It no longer bites. It brushes. A crow hops along the fence. Somewhere in the woods, water is moving again, and you hear it like a distant conversation. Mud clings to your boots. Ice clings to the corners of the yard, stubborn and dirty, like the last guest who refuses to leave the party. You watch a patch of snow shrink into itself near the firewood pile. You stare at it for a full minute, just to be sure. You're sure. The freeze is breaking. That doesn't mean the work is over. In fact, the mud season might be worse. The snow has insulated your home, your fields, your compost pit. Now everything is exposed, wet, sagging, and slightly moldy. But still, there's something miraculous about seeing the ground again. Brown, frozen, full of promise. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants welcomed the thaw or dreaded it. Some feared flooding, landslides, rot. Others saw it as a sign that the worst was over. That planting season, though exhausting, would at least mean movement, sunshine, and maybe even green things again. You're somewhere in the middle. You miss the stillness, the long dark hours around the fire. But you also miss walking without slipping, food that isn't gray, and the concept of laundry that dries. You head back inside and nod to your spouse. It started. They nod. No need to say more. You both know what comes next. You gather the winter gear, the moss shoes, the wool wrappings, the patch blanket, and begin inspecting them. What survived? What needs mending? What gets stored? What gets burned as an offering to the gods of spring, in hopes they hurry the thaw? Children start to wake, blinking, stretching, whispering about birds they might have heard. The pig rises too, shaking himself like a sleepy old merchant preparing for another long day of doing nothing useful. And you? You sip the last of the ale. It's flat, it's sour, it's perfect, because you made it. You survived the coldest nights, not with ease, not without loss, but with stubbornness, blankets, questionable foot wraps, and the companionship of animals and humans who snore in harmony. You survived, and that's worth something. So now, let's let that last scene settle in your mind. The door is open just a little. You hear the wind rustling gently in the bare trees, the snow melting in slow, rhythmic drips. Inside, your home is quiet again, but it's a softer kind of silence now. like the world is exhaling after months of holding its breath. The fire in the hearth is low, but still warm. The children are back under the blankets. The pig is tucked into his favorite corner, and you're standing there in your wool cloak, watching the steam rise from your cup. You're tired, but not empty. You're worn, but not broken. Outside, the ground is muddy, yes, but it's alive. The frost is loosening its grip. The sky is stretching, little by little, toward blue. And you, your breath slow, your heart calm. You're standing in the middle of it all, knowing that the hardest part of the season is behind you. So now, breathe deeply. Let your shoulders fall. Let your feet uncurl beneath the blanket. Nothing is rushing you. Nothing needs your attention. You've done enough. You've seen the coldest night, and you've come through it with grit, a bit of laughter, and the warm hope of a gentler season on its way. You are safe. You are still. And soon, you will sleep.